And is this going to give me an issue? I hope not. Here we go. Let's see. I want to get the right screen. This one. Okay, I've put the I've made my resolution 1600 by 900 so that you can see detail fairly well. Hi, everybody. Um, what Paul said is my session is based on is a dashboard that I made in Microsoft Excel that I presented to a national convention in Phoenix 3 years ago. And I had help putting this together from another a friend of mine from Quebec. Um, the idea is that it monitors the activity in Microsoft Dynamics GP. Now, some of you will have seen the presentation given by David Laster, who came from Massachusetts to Green Bay to present his Power BI version of this, because he saw me present in Phoenix in 2018 and he got a bee in his bonnet to convert it into Power BI. But first, I'm going to quickly show what this is. Um, uh, this is live, by the way. I'm logged into my work computer, and it's showing all the people that are using the software right now. And this upper left area here is a quick little grid of what's going on, what people working with batches of records, um, uh, which ones are active, meaning they're posting or they're printing or they're doing something. Um, a list of the SQL sessions. This list shows when they logged in, so it's I can tell immediately which of our users are logged in. I've got a little navigation bar over here, and then a number of tabs. Um, I'll go to active batches. This is just an Excel table drawing information from SQL tables on our database server. Let's see. I'm going to hide that. But they're just tables, data coming from GP. Um, the the main difference between just displaying the data and the dashboard capability here is that I can perform certain functions if something goes wrong. And, a user crashes out of GP, I would see that on this first page. The row would light up in red, and then I can click this button to reset that connection. I also track usage for these users throughout the day. And this chart is one of the very nice ones that Excel does effortlessly. I'm saying it like that because it was an extreme amount of effort for me to try to duplicate this in Power BI. And perhaps because we have people that use Power BI all the time, they can possibly point out to me where the heck I went wrong or went down a path that I could have avoided. But this
I'll
chart,
give you a hint. 3D charts are terrible, but keep going.
yes, I found that out. Um, but this is the chart that I really wanted to bring across, because this, I haven't refreshed it in the last 15 minutes or so. But if I refresh the data, um, the chart kind of advances, and it shows here the latest time that somebody was doing something in GP was 6 minutes after 2 o'clock, so just 8-9 minutes ago. And it shows a progression throughout the day. And if I hover over one of these columns, it shows me who it is and what time it was and how many processes occurred during that time. This I thought would be the true test of making the conversion to GP. I mean to Power BI. This chart is based on another table. This whole thing is based on tables. Um, Secondarily, I was hoping to get something like this. This is a 2 week stretch of time showing how many people were logged in on average each hour. So, and I hover over one of the columns, and it shows me there were 8 users logged in at that point on July 19th. And as I say, it goes back to 2 weeks. Okay, now I said that David Laster had seen my presentation on this Excel workbook in Phoenix, and he got inspired, and he spent many, many, many weekends, days. I'd say that he spent a good solid month of time, maybe more, putting together his Power BI uh, application. This is just a piece of it. Now, presenting tables of data in Power BI is very simple. The interesting thing about this Power BI um, report is that it has about, well, I can show you. If we look at the data, here is the list of tables down the right hand side here. Um, there are over 100 tables in this particular Power BI model, and um, it contains not only what's happening now, but he expanded it to include configuration information. How are we set up with vendors? You know, how many vendors do we have and customers? Um, and so there are tables for each one of those things. Um, and each of these um, each of these items, some of them have only one row, um, which of course makes it easier to display here if you only have one record. Um, but there are 30 pages in this report. You can see that down here, page 1 of 30. And he's got them color coded based on the overall function. Anyway, he showed this to us in Green Bay at uh, the Whipfly home office, and it was a pretty cool presentation. The fact that he was able to do all of this, and when I refresh this, it takes about 5 minutes to get all the stuff going, but I don't have this loaded up to the Power BI uh, cloud uh, repository. This is local. I'm just opening it with the Power BI desktop. So it takes me about 5 minutes, and I have not bothered to try to set up the gateway and all the other superstructure that you need to have for it to work um, in the cloud. Okay, so I saw this and I thought this was pretty dang cool, but there are zero graphs in this thing, no charts at all. So what I have done is I began putting things together, and I was focusing on that one item. I wanted to get this data, which is in the columns are the users throughout the day, and then the time of day when the activity occurred and how many activities occurred at that time for that user. So if we were to create a new one, the only the only chart type I found that approached what I wanted was Sandance. This is apparently the latest version, 2019. I got this relatively recently, just to make this presentation.
Are you
Um,
going to rebuild from scratch, or do you have a finished product to show us?
I do have a finished product, a
Okay, all
couple
right,
of them.
all right.
So
If you want to,
I
if it's
take it from
important,
that.
if it's
I
important
take
to
it.
hit the highlights, but we want 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes.
Hmm. Um, I
Steve.
think it'll take me another 3 minutes. Is
Okay,
somebody else asking a question? Um,
no, you're
I'll
good.
put this aside.
Okay,
Um, I made 2 attempts at it. This one shows the original stab that I made. It has the users on this axis, um, and here are the um, all of the visualization properties are listed here. I don't for the Sandance for the Sandance.
So you must have used a custom visual for all of the
Yes.
options there. Okay,
Well, this
interesting.
is here. I got this from the online repository of custom visuals.
Ah, okay.
So I didn't make this. Good Lord. Um, so for whatever reason, the Sandance visual has a set of tabs here that let you mess around uh, with the layout of this report. I'm going to maximize this, and the data can be laid out in several different ways, um, and you'll see here this number. This was an artifact of the data that I put together. I was hoping to uh, summarize 5 minutes worth at a time,
Hmm.
and um, at first um, I didn't know what to do to make a value that would show each bucket of 5 minutes. So I made it a numeric value, um, taking the number of minutes from a certain time. But the the data or the visualizations changed drastically with each of these options. Tree map, it didn't do a thing for me because you have to hover over the block to see who it is and which period and the count. Um, the bar chart is horizontal. Um, that doesn't show me what I want. The column chart doesn't. It's got a stacked column.
Sure.
Density is, eh, that's not it either. For this particular version, the stacks is what worked best. And if you notice, the appearance of this has changed from what was up here originally. So I said I made a couple stabs at this. I'm going to show you the second one. This is the finished, and I am.
So, Steve, does that stacked graph allow you to call out what you're looking for well? I'm just wondering if your next steps could possibly be some KPIs or some things that alert to things, or are you looking at more of a trying to see the whole picture?
I am looking to see the whole picture. The KPIs, because it's an ongoing throughout the day history of activity.
Mhm.
When are people active? Um, uh, Part of it is to see if we're approaching the maximum number of users, and is it really heavy at certain times of the day. Um, but this chart is fairly nicely modifiable with a slider here to break up the periods into finer finer units. Um, but this wasn't very satisfactory. Now, what I am having an issue with here
You just zoomed
is,
in on your chart, back upper left, click back to
oh
report.
yes, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Shows you how much I use Power BI. I made another one. Oh, one thing I want to show before I get back there. In the properties for this stacks, um, it has a y-axis and an x-axis value, and then it figures out, okay, this is the z, this is the count, um, and I think the density. Oh, and there now. Oh, geez, this kind of freaks me out about this visualization too, because this happens. The density uh, change. I think I clicked on density earlier and it looked nothing like this. This is what I wound up with. And here is where I was kind of flabbergasted. I figured out a way to show the times as actual times, 7, 10, 11 o'clock, etc. But now I've got a z-axis, and I can actually tell it to put the count of the activity on the z-axis. Part of my frustration is that these custom visualizations, some of them, are a little flaky, and so to me that means I can't really count on them. If they change their appearance at the drop of a hat, I'm less interested in trying to work with them. And I don't know, I can't. Somebody can tell me how to move this legend over into an area that's blank. That would be helpful.
So that's a custom visual. Did you have to pay for that one?
No.
Okay.
So I guess anything free is worth what you pay for it. But
it's a Microsoft visual, by the way, from Microsoft Research.
Nice.
There we are. So this gave me sort of what I want, but what I determined was it was a little too flaky for me to want to use, and this was the principal reason for, or the principal thing that I wanted to work right in Power BI. So at present, I'm going to stay with my Excel workbook because it was way simpler to do this type of chart.
Gotcha.
So that'll do.
Well, thank you. That's a good share of an example that we were trying to replicate in Power BI and haven't quite gotten quite what you need yet. That's a good summary.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
All right. Our next user share is coming from Josh, right? Josh,
Sure.
Merrick, you have something to share for us?
Yeah. So let me share my screen and then we'll get started on this. But really my topic is to talk about Microsoft Teams and how you can analyze your personal data using Power BI. And can everyone see the screen?
Nothing yet. There we go.
All right. So as of just recently, Microsoft opened up the ability to take your personal Teams data and really bring it into Power BI and see what your meeting summary looks like, how many times you're chatting, look at the teams you're involved in and how active they are. And you can do this all right within Teams is the way I've found. The way to go about bringing it in, they do have a connector as well to bring in and create your own information. So you can use the connector and pull the data back as well. But really, if you start by going to your Teams, and if you have the Power BI up in Teams, if you don't, you can add it by clicking on the three dots and searching for more apps, but I have it already in because I use it quite frequently. So in Power BI, what I'm able to do is get the same interface as if I were in the service and start using Power BI right within here. To open up and start building the Teams portion of it, you would pick a workspace, if it's going to show here for me. So if I pick one of the workspaces I have access to, as soon as I go in here, I have then the ability to create a new report. Once I click on creating a new report, a new little spot opens up. There's this analyze your team's data. Once you click on that, it's going to go and do its magic behind the scenes and build out a report for you in Power BI. So from here, really, I found that now that it's created the report for me, I can go and get access to that report straight through the normal service if I want, so I don't have to be directly in Teams. I can then go and look at that report right out in the same service. So some of the things that it really calls out right away is what your meeting summary is. So you can see a trend of really how many meetings you've been involved in over the past X amount of time. And right now I'm looking at last 31 days. I do have the ability to switch this with some pre-built-in slicers. So I could look at the last 7, last 14, 31, or 90. But it tells me how many meetings I've been in, how many I actually created myself. So I know, am I creating a lot of meetings? Am I just attending a lot of meetings? And then how many are just like one-on-one calls or one-to-one calls that I've been having? The other thing I can do is look at how many times I'm sharing audio and video, how many times I'm doing screen sharing, when they're happening, and really get a good glimpse of how I'm leveraging Teams myself. And again, I can get it in the chat as well. So it's bringing in kind of the main components that we use all the time when it comes to Teams. So screen sharing, chatting, and Teams activity potentially as well. Some of the other tabs that you have in here are team activity. So on this page specifically, you can go and look at the different teams and when things are being replied to, different the guests, the active channels, how many posts are in there, how long it's been without any active users or without any posts. So kind of seeing, do we have stale teams out there that we can maybe clean up because they're not being used, or what are the most active ones that people are using? And then there's a little bit more detail on this as well on the final tab. So now I can look at a specific team as well and see how many active users I have, how many active channels, if there's any mentions, what the engagement is on it. And it also uses some of the other features where it's giving you text information, not just charts as well about that specific one. So if I picked potentially a different one, I could dive in and see specifically about each individual team page within Microsoft Teams as well. So now I could leverage this from the service, I could leverage it from Teams. The other things you can really do is if you like using this report and you find it valuable, you also have the ability as an organization to push it out to everyone as well. So that way it gets pinned for them and then they have the ability to go in and not have to dig and find it as well. But really that's how you can take and pull your team's data, specifically what you're doing with chat and video conferencing and everything about it, and looking at your teams into Power BI. Now on the flip side of that, I did try going down the route of pulling in the connector and connecting the teams. I didn't build anything out for the user share, but I did look and see what it did bring back, and it brings back a few different, like I think 3 different tables that are really making up the same kind of aspect. So you could build your own charts and visuals if you're not, if you don't want all of the visuals you're getting in the pre-built app, or you only want certain things that you want to call out as an organization, you have the ability to go and pull that data in as well.
And this is a good example of just playing around with what the possibilities are with Power BI, and for free, because as long as you have Teams, you can build this inside, from Teams. You can say click, click, and it'll analyze your Teams data. You don't need Power BI Pro. You don't need Power BI Desktop.
Yeah, you can do it right to your own My Workspace, and that's where I first put this one in, and you can see it's running out of there as My Workspace, which I get just by signing up for Power BI, and then I can pull in my Teams data. The other thing I found out by digging through this is Microsoft is also looking at how they can expand Power BI into other applications, and it looks like Microsoft Forms is potentially on the list next, that they might integrate both Forms and Power BI together.
That'd be cool. Very nice.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah.
I know we've got some teams running and we would like to report on their utilization, and this would be great.
Absolutely.
Excellent. All right. Our next user share, I believe, is Dustin. You had something that you could showcase?
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for sharing that, Josh. That was cool. I hadn't seen that yet. All right, let me know when you guys can see my screen.
Yep.
So this is kind of similar. I took a different approach, but I connected to Exchange, and I'm referencing my calendar out of Outlook. So I use my calendar a lot, I think as a lot of us do, but I use it a lot to kind of block off my time and manage my time more or as much in reverse as I do going forward. So this is a tool that I can use now to visualize and see where I've spent different blocks of time, and kind of see those as different visuals on here using categories. Another cool thing that I used here, so I've got a couple of kind of hidden menu bars over here, but I also set parameters so I can track the different days of the week. So if it's a shorter week versus a longer week, it tells me what work day I'm at. So if I want to kind of gauge my time off of today being Thursday, it's the fourth work day of the week. But I could also set this to have like my Wednesday perspective or whatnot. And then it kind of calculates my goal and then gives me my different hours. So I can do a couple of different things, and I can go historical to look at different times, all with some different nested kind of hidden options over here. But it's definitely fun to kind of start looking at the Outlook data and what we're using through there. And I was actually pretty impressed how easy it is to connect to Exchange too. It wasn't something that caused too much trouble.
Where did you pull in the goal target data from, or did you come up with that somewhere outside of Outlook?
Yeah, so that's something outside of Outlook. That's just a parameter that I'd set. So it's just for kind of gauging different usages and different times.
Mm-hmm.
And then just a couple of different views. It's all a single page report where I'm just hiding and showing different things. So my now this is the desktop version, but my selection pane is pretty extensive, where I'm hiding and making visible and unhiding different things.
Neat.
It's a nice looking dashboard.
Yeah.
So you're just connecting directly to Exchange then?
Yeah, so here I'll pull up the Power Query side.
It's pretty cool.
So I'm doing some different date manipulation, but you can pick as a source and then just plug in your email and your credentials, and it'll pull it in very simply. But then if you just go from new sources, and it's
Nice.
just Exchange Online. But it's kind of fun too. Then you can look at all your email history too. And I haven't gone into that too much. I spend enough time in email. I don't want to analyze my email data, but it's kind of cool to see. I mean, what has replies, what you haven't replied to, what your different, all the information that's in Outlook is pretty accessible too. So
That's
Nice.
just a reminder. There's so many connectors in there that I completely don't even think about looking for them in here, but there's probably a lot of data that I could access.
yeah, for sure. Some of them are a little clunkier than others, and this one I would not put in that category. Again, it was way easier to connect than I was anticipating. So something fun to play around with. It's also neat. I mean, there are times when I've been looking for data to kind of play with, and this is a good one if you want to do something or just kind of have this started for me as just kind of like a hobby little dashboard or whatnot to just kind of play with and practice with some different visuals. It was one of the first times, or I shouldn't say first, but more extensive times that I used the parameters. And that's something that's kind of cool that you can use to adjust. I've gotten a similar approach before by just using measures that I would change the value in the measure and have it be a static value. But the parameters is definitely a neat feature to explore.
I like it. Great share. Thank you so much.
Oh, very cool.
All
Yeah.
right.
Thank you.
One of the things, Dustin, you could do actually is why not integrate with text analytics from Azure, then analyze your emails for topics that you talk about. So you get like summaries and like keywords in your email. And then next step, would be to add sentiment analysis. So then you can even tell how many emails you send about a certain topic and what the sentiment is. And maybe there's a relation between when that happens in time over the day and your sentiment. That would be very cool.
That would be cool.
Can you actually do the same sort of thing with the chat data from Teams?
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
Very cool.
It will take a while because
Sure.
it needs to go back to Azure, and it's not going to be easy or fast, but it will happen eventually. And the text analytics and sentiment analysis, at least to a certain extent, is free. So at least for your personal kind of set of data, I think that would be doable. Would be very cool to see that, by the way, as an extension. It would be awesome.
Nice.
Nice. Excellent. Those are our user shares. Keep in mind, my fellow community user group members, I'll be reaching out at future events to try and convince a few more user shares out of you based on things you're either working through or something interesting you've got going on. So I know your names now and I'll be tracking you down. So our next piece is our main presenter. We have the honor of having Jay here, who is a Microsoft Power BI product manager in our user group, to talk about composite models. So I'll let you take it away. Thanks for coming.
Teams, thank you. Sorry, Teams had a bit of an issue allowing me to press the unmute button. First of all, again, thanks for having me. It's always an honor to be invited to do talks at any user group. And before I forget, while I'm starting to share my screen, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being part of the community. Right, being part of the passionate group of people that spend time outside of their maybe normal working hours, or during the working hours, at least they spend time talking about and thinking about the product that we work on. Honestly, I can tell you, as a person who works on a product and we try to deliver a great product, this is, for us, you are the ones that make us do our work with a happy heart and come to work with a smile, because we know our work is valued, and you providing that feedback and being part of the community and being active wherever you are on the social networks or whatever channel you choose to use, it's just that just really keeps us going. So please continue doing that. I know it's not always easy. I know we're not always listening to you and building the things you want us to do. But hey, we're at least, we're trying. And keep pushing the feedback to us. The only thing that can happen is the product gets better. So with that, I guess you can all see my screen? Question mark? Okay, good. So let's see. So the topic today is composite models, or actually, it is more about a certain part of composite. Most of my presentation is gonna be about a certain part of the composite models. But before we get into the content, I'm Jay, or Jeroen, if you speak Dutch. If you happen to speak Dutch, I don't expect you to. That's why I call myself Jay. I blame my parents for having an incompatible name with anybody that doesn't speak Dutch.
I really debated for a while because I have a Dutch heritage, but I couldn't do it. So.
Yeah, we chatted before, and I asked you, like, give me your name. There is a chance you can speak some Dutch.
Right.
But I don't blame you. As I said, I blame my parents for not having the foresight and the vision that I would ever live in and work in a country that doesn't speak Dutch. So I go by Jay for everybody else. I'm a Microsoft employee for 13 years now. So that's what we say, halfway to the coffin. Because at Microsoft, every 5 years, you get a crystal. No, I'll explain. You get a crystal. I mean, you might be able to see them here. That one is 5 years. That one is 10 years. They get bigger, as you can see, right? So the one at 25 years is so big, they wheel it out to you because it's so heavy. It's called the coffin. So if you're halfway to the coffin, you're with the company for 12.5 years.
Can you sit in it? Is it hollow?
No, well, the box, of course, but the crystal itself is not hollow. No, they're just solid. Nice. Anyway, so I'm halfway to the coffin, a little over. And I've been with Microsoft, as I said, for that time. I worked at various different roles in the field in the Netherlands. I moved to the US in 2018, December, to join the product group. I worked on Azure SQL for a little bit, did some machine learning server, got the opportunity to kill the product there, which is always fun to do. And then I've joined Power BI. And I really love Power BI. I do enjoy working with Power BI, blogging about it, as in my previous roles before I was on the product team, as the Dutch data dude. That's my nickname as well. You might have seen my blog. I'm not so active anymore because today I'm just writing stuff for the product, so I don't get to play with it that much anymore. But yeah, that's basically me. So, and I am part of what we call the creator team. And in the creator team, we try to think about people that create reports for others. So we're not entirely focused on consumers of reports, but we're thinking about like what's the experience in desktop and what's the experience on how do you actually create a report for others to use. And within that group, I focus on modeling. So everything related to data modeling, the model view, but also DAX, the great, fun, very easy to use programming language, right? Everything that's there. I worry about it daily to try to make it easier. So that's kind of my area. And I'm a program manager or product manager at Microsoft. That basically means that I try to come up with the plans and the specifications for what this product needs to start doing in my area. And then I write that down and I discuss that with architects. We come up with a great plan. I write it down. I hand it over to our software engineers. That's the other role that we have in the product group. And the software engineers, they write the software and they read the plan and they start building the software. They make a technical specification and they write the software. Invariably, the software engineer, however, always writes something else than what the actual plan was. And then afterwards, they start explaining to me that what they built was actually what I meant. Right? So that's kind of how this works. So I don't manage anybody. Sometimes people think that program managers at Microsoft manage people. We don't. We're on the same level as a software engineer. We're just working side by side. We don't have a power relationship at all. It's just that we have software engineers, the real intelligent people that can actually build magical software. And we have people that, cannot write software, but we can talk about it. And we can write documents and PowerPoints. And that's, I'm one of that last group. So we're going to talk about composite models, and specifically we're going to talk about what is happening with composite models, because composite models, and I'll define composite models in a second, has been going through a couple changes. We're making some updates, we're making some improvements on it, and those improvements are currently in preview. They have been since December last year, and they are in preview under the preview with the longest name ever, which is Direct Query for Azure Analysis Services and Power BI data sets. You can see I practiced this. I said this before.
Yeah, and you'll note that nowhere in any meetup or podcast or anything like that do they do that. They just call it composite models. And then we get into this. We have to explain it's under this feature set in the preview section in Power BI Desktop.
Yes, and there's a deliberate reason for that.
Okay.
Because we wanted to make sure that we call it completely different, because while it's in preview, we wanted to be absolutely clear on whether it is in production or in preview. And if somebody complains about a certain part of this feature, we know immediately it's not in the production version, right? So we debated to call it Composite Models V2, but it's not entirely that, because it's just an add-on. You can just use today composite models if you're not interested in doing that against a Power BI dataset or Azure Analysis Services. You can still use composite models. So it's not a V2. It's not an improvement of everything. It's just an add-on. So we called it Direct Query for Azure Analysis Services and Power BI datasets, because that's what it is. And I'll explain what it all is in just a second. However, as soon as this gets out of preview, we're going to go back and just call this composite models, because that's what it is. In the end, what we're doing in this preview is we're opening up composite models for 2 more data sources, Power BI datasets and Azure Analysis Services. So with that, let's talk about what composite models actually are, if my slides allow me to do anything. And I like to talk about that without talking about technology. I like to talk about a tale of 2 kingdoms, because that to me really explains what a composite model is all about. So let me, humor me for a couple of seconds or minutes while I take you through this story. And hopefully the story is recognizable. So let's imagine you are a business analyst or a data analyst over in the marketing department of your organization. Let's call it Venezuela, right? You're here in the country of Venezuela. You're working for the king or queen or whoever, the president, whatever it is, a ruler of Venezuela, right? And your job is to come up with the analysis that helps her to create, base their decisions on, right? To decide where to invest, who to talk to, which products to buy from another country, maybe, where to find like relationships or build like good relationships with other countries, right? That's your job. And as part of that, what you do is you basically grab data from everywhere, right? So you take data from Excel, you take data from online, you go on Facebook, you scan Twitter, you mash them up together. And basically the beauty of this is when those things get together, that's where the actual value is, right? Just having those separate sources of like, oh, this is our bookkeeping, this is our import-export ledger, this is what the other country is doing. Having that as separate sources is not very useful. It's great when it comes together, and that's where actually the magic is. And that's what a composite model is. You build a composite model all the time for that ruler, and that ruler loves you, right? You mash up Excel, you mash up CSVs, people come to you to help. She asks you like, oh, can you come up with this analysis? What about this? If you twist it this way, can you add this source to it? Great. So life is awesome, right? When you are in Venezuela. So at one morning, she invites you to her office, right? She invites you and says, hey, you're getting so famous, I need your help because there is a neighboring country, Itistan. It's on the other side of the border. And we are trying to set up a trade agreement with them, but it's not entirely working. We don't speak the same language. They work differently. They're differently organized. I don't get it. Can you please go and investigate, go over the border, investigate and see how we can start working together and how we join our information systems together so we can come up with a good alliance. And naturally, of course, you comply, right? I mean, they are the ruler, you just follow, right? And you're honored by this request. So you enter Itistan. And the moment you cross the border to Itistan, you notice things work differently there, right? It is paper-based. There's rules and regulations that you haven't even heard of. There's a whole law book that you haven't even seen before. There's departments that you haven't seen before. It's completely different from your free and open world that you've seen in Venezuela. And their reports and their data sets, they come from IT systems. They have different rules and regulations. They don't want you to just download that data and just run with it and mash it up with whatever you have, like you'd be doing at Venezuela. They don't want you to do that because they lose track of where it went and how the report came to be. The stakes are maybe higher. They have something to protect. The data might be more sensitive. So as a result, after all, you talk to people in Itistan, you hit a wall, right? Suddenly, it doesn't become possible to combine that Itistan data with your Venezuela data and come up with this magic mashup that you've been doing. So now what? You're stuck, right? Composite models where you were allowed to do everything and combine everything together in Venezuela suddenly doesn't work anymore. Your trick that you used to do doesn't work anymore. Well, that's where our preview comes in, because that is exactly the point that we're trying to make here. Composite models today, forget about the preview for a second, the released version of composite models breaks when you start working with typical IT sources, such as a Power BI data sets and an Azure Analysis Services source. If you connect to any of those, there is no composite model. You cannot add an Excel file. You cannot add a CSV. You cannot add an external source. It's either one of the sources or a composite model. Now with this preview, what we're doing is we're allowing you to connect to Azure Analysis Services, to connect to Power BI data sets and still create a composite model. That's the lifeline that we're trying to build for everybody in Venezuela and Itistan or whatever country or company or organization you're actually in. So that's my little story that, hopefully kind of paints the picture of where we are going with composite models. So just as an overview, if you don't necessarily did follow my story, or you're not entirely sure what I'm talking about, back to the technology. Currently, today, composite models allow you to take data from any import source, which means the data gets injected into the in-memory database that underpins Power BI. Combine data from any import source and then mash it up, combine it with other sources such as direct query sources. Direct query sources mean the data stays where it is. It's not imported, but we query it against where the data source is. So that's great for very large data sets. So composite models allow you to do that, right? Before we had composite models, it was one source and one source only. So it might be your Excel file, might be your SQL file, but never together, right? And today you can do that. Now, one of the things that we have in Power BI, for example, is aggregations, which allow you to work with massive amounts of data, and then still have the benefit of imports, which is an advanced topic. I won't cover it today, but composite models are actually a foundation to build that technology in. However, as I explained in my little story here, is the moment you start connecting to typical IT data sources, all of that goes out of the window. There's no way for you to build a composite model against the typical semantic models that enterprises provide, like an Azure Analysis Services environment or a Power BI data set, or any of the other things that are here on the slide. SAP HANA, SAP BW, SQL Server Analysis Services, all very popular IT-controlled, IT-organized sources that you really want to open up and connect to, and then enrich with other data. And today you are not allowed. You simply cannot do that. And that's where our preview comes in. So we're trying to provide you this capability where you are still able to connect to those IT sources, but on the other hand, also able and required to follow the rules that IT sets. So we're not trying to create a Wild West scenario where you just download everything from the IT source, right? We're trying to strike a balance between IT and flexibility to say, hey, you connect to the IT source and you are able to extend it. But you can always trace back that originally the data came from the IT source. You can always see what happened in that extension while you were building your beautiful mashup and your beautiful composite model that hopefully answers the question to the king or queen that you're serving. And when we talk about the IT systems, we normally talk about enterprise semantic models. That's our name for it. Basically, it takes us away from how it was actually built. It talks more about what it actually means, right? Those things have tight security. They have RLS on top of it, row-level security. They are controlled and organized by IT. They have a managed process. They have releases. They have versioning, all of the good stuff with an enterprise architecture board that might not be as familiar to you when you're just a Power BI user as a business analyst over in business, right, or in marketing. And what we really wanted to do is we want to allow you to take those data from the enterprise semantic model and then enrich it with your own. But that's not all of it, because we saw that a lot of people actually want to go one step further and say, hey, if somebody connected to my enterprise semantic model and made an analysis that combines the semantic model with Excel, what if I can take that model, that thing that came out of that combination, and then add another? So another step in my chain of analysis, if you will, right? Your chain of analysis being, I start with my composite model from IT, I added my Excel, and then somebody else adds another source, and then somebody else adds another source, or maybe creates another view, right? What if we allow you to make a chain of data through your organization? So all of that is the goal of this preview. So the preview allows you, and that's live since 16th of December 2020, it allows you to use the current composite models capabilities against Azure Analysis Services and Power BI data sets, right? It allows you to extend semantic models, as I explained, or it allows you to personalize them. For example, let's imagine IT works, the IT department for your organization is in US, right? People in the US have to my European brain, really weird idea that a date format string should be month, day, year. Makes total sense for everybody in the US. Doesn't make sense to my European brain at all. By now it does, after almost 3 years. So what if you can leave the semantic model as is? It makes perfect sense for everybody in the US. But then your business analyst over in Europe can say, well, I know that that's the way it works in the US. But over here, the customers I work for, the users of my report, actually wants to see that exact date, but then formatted day, month, year, right? Not month, day, year. So what if I allow a business user to just make that personalization, change that format string? Not extending the data. The data that's there is fine. It's just the way it's presented needs to be differently. So that's another feature that we allow you to do. So there's basically two scenarios: adding more data or changing the way it looks. For example, by adding a calculation or changing the format string. Now, this sounds great. There are a couple of limitations that you need to know about. First of all, we cannot, change the world in one day, right? We cannot change everything. So here's a preview of the documentation that will go live when this becomes general available, and it will remove, essentially cross out a couple sources from the list of sources that aren't supported with composite models. So Power BI datasets and Azure Analysis Services will be supported. SAP HANA, SAP BW won't be supported. Not right now, at least. We're working through a plan to see what we can do, but it's not part of this preview. And the other very popular source is SQL Server Analysis Services. Now, for SQL Server Analysis Services, we actually have two flavors. We have multidimensional, we have tabular. Multidimensional will not be supported for this. So if you connect to multidimensional SSAS, you will still not be able to create a composite model. Tabular will be supported. SSAS tabular will be supported if you use that. However, we will need to wait until the next major release of SQL Server for that to ship to you, which might take a little bit. Okay, did I lose you guys, or no, you're still here? Because my video feed just suddenly went blank. Okay, good.
You've been coming through fine.
I'm just checking. Okay, good. So essentially, that's where we are today, right? This is the preview that we have. We are allowing you to extend and personalize data that is based on Power BI data sets and and Azure Analysis Services. If you're using any other source that is not currently supporting composite model, you're out of luck, except for SQL Server Analysis Services tabular models, which will be supported in time when we get the next major release of SQL. And of course, you then still need to roll it out in your organization, right? It won't be available until your IT department decides to roll it out. Okay, so any questions so far about this preview?
Feel free to unmute and ask quick, or type it in the chat. Well, I'll read it. We'll be watching for it. What about real-time data sources?
Yeah, good one. So real-time is partly supported, partly not, because we're making lots of changes in the real-time platform, actually. As you might have seen yesterday morning. Did I publish the blog yesterday morning? I think so. The blog on blog.powerbi.com with the release notes for July. I think it was yesterday. I lost track of time. But there is a new public preview of our streaming data flows and our streaming service. So that's going through a lot of changes. But in the end, yes, we want to support real-time sources as well. But I cannot say today that all of the real-time sources that are out there today will work.
Very good. Thanks.
Okay.
No other questions in the chat. I think we're good.
Let's look at a demo then. That's always the exciting part.
I love demos.
Yeah, me too. It's always tricky, but let's see what happens. So here we are. This is Power BI Desktop. This is Power BI Desktop July, I think. Yeah, July version. So no trickery, no, this is the version you can have as well. I needed to check because I also have other versions on my machine, which I'm not allowed to show you. So, this is empty. There's nothing in here at this point, right? So what I can do is I can start connecting to, okay, first things first, what I need to do, go into options, and that's where you need to enable the preview. If you go to your preview features, make sure you have Direct query for PBI datasets and AS, which is analysis services, enabled. You can learn more here. That will go to the blog that I wrote, or share feedback is the community page where we collect feedback. Make sure you have that enabled. If you don't, it won't. What I'm about to do won't work. And of course, Power BI then needs to restart afterwards. So once you have that, what we can do is we can go to get data, and I can prove to you immediately that, or almost immediately, that this feature works. So what I can do is I will start with a Power BI data set, right? Without this feature, this would still work, but it wouldn't allow me to do anything else, right? So I'm going to connect to that Power BI data set. If it works today. Internet is not that great this morning. Oh, come on. There we go. So I'm going to search for, whoops, I cannot even type my own name anymore. There we go. So I'm going to connect to my AdventureWorks DW 2020 data source. So imagine this is my enterprise semantic model that IT created for me, right? It's a Power BI data set that I'm now connecting to. No surprises here. I mean, this you can do today, right? I mean, yes, you can connect to a Power BI data set and create reports. Awesome. So you might notice here in the bottom right, it says connected live to my Power BI data set. I'm not sure if you can read that, but it says connected live to Power BI data set, blah, 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 in Workspace. It also says something like, make changes to this model. That's new. That's because that's the preview thing that allows you to do that, because without the preview, you wouldn't be able to do that. So I can either now add a measure or change a format string or whatever to make changes to the model. What's the fun in that? Let me just add more data. So I'm just going to go get data. And the moment I click that, I notice that that button wouldn't be available unless I'm in the preview. And it also tells me like, hey, if you want to do this, we actually need to create a local model. We need to migrate or upgrade you from a live to a direct query connection. Now that doesn't hurt, but the only difference is that we get a local model. And a local model is basically a place for us to store the metadata about the connection. So if you are in a live connection, Power BI is just a looking glass. It's just a way to query data from the source. There is no place for us to store any metadata about your model or any customizations. Now, the moment you add one more source to your live connection, we need to upgrade you to a composite model, which involves creating a local model. And a local model we get by migrating all of the live connections to a direct query connection. It still means the data stays where it is. The difference is that we also have a metadata layer in Power BI. No data is going to be copied. We're just going to add the metadata layer. So that's what I'm doing here. So now it's switching me over from a Power BI live connection to the Power BI datasets to a direct query connection to the Power BI dataset. It will tell you that in the bottom right in just a second. There's nothing else that has changed so far. It's just that it's making that connection, right? You have seen switch. It switched now. It now says storage mode direct query. Great. So now I can add my other data source. So let's do my departmental database. So I'm going to connect to that. I'm just going to copy the server name because I don't want to be stuck typing it. And I'm going to make another direct query connection. So I'm not going to import the data. I'm now extending my data model with another direct query connection next to my data set I already had. So that's now trying to connect to the SQL Server. And with any luck, it finds it. There we go. And from this SQL Server, I want country and bike sales. And I'm going to load. Loading, kind of a misnomer. It doesn't actually load the data into Power BI, it just creates the connection in the query. Now it tells me, hey, since you're doing this, it might be a security risk, because what happens here, if you have auto detect for relationships on, we will start querying data sets with information about the other data set to figure out which relationships might exist in this model. So we're just telling you that that might happen. You might be exposing information about the left model to the right model or vice versa, just by the virtue of this happening. So if you're connecting with a competitor data source and you really don't want them to be able to see inside of your data source or even know which columns and table names you have, then you really shouldn't be doing that. But in this case, it's fine. So I'm now connecting the to that other source, right? So the extra tables showed up on the right. We can look at a data model, and we can see that we have what we call two source groups, right? You will see a light blue source group here, which is my first one, right? It's sales and sales territory and product and customer. And we have another one, which is unrelated to it. I didn't build any relationships between them, which is darker blue, bike sales and country, right? So those are two source groups. Basically, a source group is everything that came from one direct query connection. So I have two now, right? SQL and Power BI datasets. And any import source is also its own source group. So all of the import sources are combined into one source group in your data model. Great, so this is the way you can see where data came from. So I already gave it away a little bit. Are we done? Well, no, of course not. Why would I? Right, I can add more. What's the fun in stopping at 2? So let me add an Excel workbook. That's an import source, right? It's a workbook. So I need to go to my OneDrive, and I'm going to get the targets. We keep the targets for sales territories in an Excel workbook. So I'm going to add an import source. So I'm going to select the targets and say load. Now, what will happen here is that it will create a connection and it will add that as an import source. Now, I stayed in the model view on purpose because you can see it happening. You can see that a new source group is created. It doesn't have this color and it has a different icon, right? This is a direct query icon. This is an import icon. It shows you that it is an import. And this is not related to anything as well. So now I have 3 sources, 2 direct query and 1 import. And what I can do is I can now build a relationship between my import and my direct query, because just having them separately, does that add any value? No, the value is in when you start combining them. So I can just drag a relationship between region and region as if this was the same data source. So there we go. I can build a relationship. I can make it active. I'm not going to bother with cross-filter direction for this demo. It's fine. It should be, of course, you should not enable that. But anyway, so I can do that. So now what I can do is I can go here and say, hey, I've got sales amount. And I got my sales territory. Great. That's all coming from the same data source, so no surprises here. That should just work, right? Great. But targets are related to sales territory. So I can now add the target in here as well. So what we're doing now is we're actually showing you data from 2 sources in one visual. Remember, one was direct query and the other was import.
Now, there is a question around,
Yep.
Is the Power BI data set the first in the chain? Do you have anything you could explain about chaining more?
I will explain that in a second. Yes, the Power BI dataset is the first in the chain. The moment I publish this report, it's the second hop in the chain, right? Or the first hop, the second item in the chain. Yeah. So great, this works, right? Are we done? No, of course, I can add more. What if I want to add a measure? I can add a measure to say, okay, I got sales and targets. What about adding variance to target? Variance to target, which is just the sum of the sales amount minus the sum of the target of the sum. Sorry, I'm typing this on the second screen. Target, right? Very simple. It combines data from 2 data sources. So I can add this. Yeah. What about policies? I don't care. Come on, Power BI, do it today. And here's my variance to target, and I can add it in here as well. Right? So this is how you can just combine data over data sources. This is awesome, right? I mean, you weren't able to do this before against a Power BI data set.
Nice.
Cool. So with that, let's go back to the slides here. Let's talk about some use cases. So customizations, as I said, right, that is basically the top use case, right? Creating a relationship
is
in the data set that doesn't exist before.
Anybody else missing his slides? We're not quite back to the slides yet. I'm not seeing
Yeah,
slides.
no slides yet.
There we go.
Yeah, he froze up for a second.
Now we got him.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Go ahead.
Cool. So the customizations, right? Changing a format string, adding a relationship, adding a measure, adding a calculated column, renaming measures, tables, columns, just for your audience. That is our top use case. The other use case, which is more interesting and more complex as well, technically, is combining multiple models and say, take a Power BI data set and then extend it, as I did with the SQL Server, and extend it with an Excel file, right? Or do something else, any other combination. You can also combine multiple Power BI data sets together, right? The sky's the limit. Well, not entirely. Of course, at some point, this will start breaking. So that's essentially what it is. That's the preview. And there's a bunch of best practices that I have for you. Please watch Marco Russo's video about best practices for this technology, because this was built in a certain way that it works fine, but you need to use it in a certain way. And he has made a great video on it. And we're also coming up with a best practices document that will accompany the GA, the general availability of this feature. So that's something to watch out for and take into account. Security, RLS, row-level security, is something that's very important to many IT sources. I spoke about it in my example with the IT department in the beginning of this presentation, the little story, right? Verify that RLS setting actually flows through your models, right? Your IT model is the first one in your chain. If they define RLS, that should flow to the second one in your chain and maybe even further, but you should absolutely know and check that is happening, because we don't want you to expose data by accident. What happens if the model that's up in the chain that you're taking data from actually gets updated? Right? How do you get the new version? Well, the new version for now means refresh in desktop to get the new metadata into your model. And then governance, we need to talk about chaining implications. So chaining means basing a data set on another data set, right? So in my example, I started with an IT data set, the one I just created in Power BI Desktop. If I publish that to the servers, that's seen as the second part of the chain, the first hop. We allow you to do 3 hops at the moment. By GA, will probably allow you to do 5. So that means that you start with Power BI data set in IT. So my data set that I just created is the second hop, right? The second part. So we allow you to do 5 steps in the chain. We think that's enough, but tell me differently if it's not. But it has implications, because at some point, chaining stops, right? You are not able to go on and on and on indefinitely. So just for technical reasons, we have limited it to 5. And another thing to know is that workspaces and data sets, please do some governance on the naming, have some naming consistency or naming versioning on it, because otherwise it will get a mess very soon. So please make sure to have things marked as IT or whatever else naming convention you might have, but keep it consistent, because we've seen customers being confused with all the different data sets that you create, because this will create a new data set for you. Now, frequently asked questions we heard before. It doesn't connect to SQL Server analysis services. If that was not clear yet, I'll say it again. It doesn't work. It's not available yet. And today, unfortunately, you need to have build permissions to read reports that have been created using this feature. And that's something that is wrong. It's something that we are planning to change. It's actually something that is our biggest roadblock before calling this GA, because I don't feel, as a PM, I don't feel this is a good way of doing it. Build permissions allow you to do so much more than just reading a report. So requiring users to have build permissions on data sets just because they were built using this feature, that doesn't feel good. a user should have read rights on a report in a data set in order to be able to view the report. Build permissions are for people that extend the data set and need to work with it, but not just consume. Today, people that also just consumers need build permissions as well. And then the other fact, the frequently asked question is consider cardinality on join keys. If you have multi-million rows on both sides of those relationships that I built cross source group, what you will see happening is that we need to build that relationship. We need to query against it and build caches on each side of the data source. That will take a while, and it might just kill the performance if your one data set is in one data center on one side of the world and the others on the other side of the world, right? Suddenly you get this power to bridge that gap. Doesn't mean you should. So you just need to think about building that relationship. And Marco, the video that was already in the chat, explains that beautifully. Now I know, and Ryan is maybe also looking for this answer. I know at some point you might not even want to allow chaining. You might want to stop using people from using this feature and build another part in your chain, right? At some point, you might want to mark a data model as final. Well, that's what we have a setting for. We call it the discourage chaining setting. You can find it in desktop under options on current file under publish data set settings. It says discourage direct query connections. If you enable that, Power BI Desktop will stop users from extending or personalizing your data set. It will only allow live connections, so that will effectively stop them from using this feature, which is great if you want the chain from growing any longer, right? At some point you might want to, because IT has built the enterprise data set, business users create a subversion of that, but as an agreement between the two, you might want to stop there, right? And this is a great way of just ticking the box and making sure it doesn't happen. Now, this doesn't say disable.
Can we set that in the service, or does it have to be done on the desktop and republish the data set?
You have to do it in the desktop at this point.
Okay.
Yeah. We're working on also building it in the service. So you have to set it in desktop or through external tools on the model itself.
Sure.
The reason it's called discourage chaining, by the way, is because it's not disabling. It is up to the external tool, up to the tool to honor this setting. So it's up to the tool to honor the setting. If you build your own external tool that uses the XML endpoints to talk to the data set, you will still be able to chain, right? This is a gentleman's agreement, right? Basically, we're saying it's not a security feature. We're just saying we disable this feature. We discourage everybody. We discourage any tool to continue chaining on top of the data set.
Ryan, are you raising your hand?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. Jay, that did answer my question on chaining, because we did have some questions come up, especially in the application life cycle management, the deployment pipelines, how we could best manage and sort of without this getting out of control, because it could get out of control very quickly.
Yes.
So that answers that. My other question was on the cardinality piece of it. Is there a best practice or a good way? I mean, other than the layout view and the diagram view, you can drag in your tables and it will connect and show you the relationships. But let's say I want to bring in another Excel file source, and I'm not quite sure what the cardinality is on the composite model, the existing composite model. How would I know as an end user to say, okay, my store ID, and it might not be as obvious on, let's say, the composite model. Is there a best way or an easy way for the end user to, bring in this data and understand the cardinality of it?
I mean, it doesn't hurt to connect your import source, right? I mean, as long as you don't build a relationship between the two, you're fine, right? It won't break. It will start becoming interesting when you build a relationship between the two. Now, there's no great way for an end user to check that cardinality before they create the relationship. We experimented with blocking them from doing that when the cardinality is above a certain threshold. But we really think that's kind of, the wrong way around, right? If somebody really wants to do this, they should be able to. However, in general, we recommend not building relations across cardinality, let's say above 1 million or so.
Okay.
Right? So, for example, what I did, I had target on region. You should really ask yourself if, I mean, of course, I had only a couple rows, so that's fast. But if that's multiple low-level data you're talking about, need target really be defined on the region? Let's talk about products, right? Do you define targets on products, or do you define targets on product categories? Right? If you can define the target on the product category level, that means that the cardinality join between your data set and your Excel file, assuming you're doing the same as I am doing with the targets in Excel, becomes way less than having to have that on the product level, which might be thousands of products. Right? So that's just a way of thinking about it. And we're doing everything that we can with caching and doing intelligent things, but we cannot guarantee that it will always work across these large data sets with huge cardinality. And it also is dependent on the data type, for example, used for the keys, right? If you use integers, it will work better than versus text strings. So all of that interesting technical things come into play here for an end user.
You could query it with DAX to determine the cardinality before the join.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. You could use external tools like Tabular Editor to figure that out. You can write a DAX statement that says count rows, right?
Yep.
Or if assuming or just distinct or whatever on whatever cardinality join column you're trying to do, right? You can do all of that. But as soon as I say DAX, I know most end users kind of zone out a little bit.
That's what I was about to say. That was a suggestion from Nicole, and I'm like, this is a question for end users. No end users writing DAX. I don't even like writing DAX.
Okay, now look at your audience today. None of us are end users, but I mean, this is something developers could do.
Yeah. You could add that in. It's maybe part of the training of users when they start using this feature. It's a very powerful feature, but with great power comes great responsibility, as they say.
Yep, that's where I was getting. Yep. Thanks, Jay.
So, sure. So, and related to this chaining thing, there's another little trick that I wanted to share, which is lineage. How do you build this picture of where data flows in your organization, right? And we can take a look at that real quick. There we go. So I said something about naming conventions. I am immediately gonna invalidate what I said myself, because this is not a great naming convention. Oh, maybe it is actually. So this is the lineage screen. So if you go to the service, the Power BI service, right, app.powerbi.com, you can open up a lineage screen. You can see how reports and dashboards and data sets are related, right? That's something that's not new. But what is new is that now this lineage screen will also show you how data sets connect. So you can see here, I have two chains, very inspired names, CH1 and CH2. And then I labeled the hops with A, B, C, and so on. There's no longer than 3 here. So as you can see, I have CH1 here, which is my first part in the chain. Then we have a hop to CHB, which is basically dependent on A, right? So this is a direct query connection to A. And this, presumably, I made some format string changes in here. This is a personalization because there's no other data in here. And then C is dependent on B. So as a result, C is also dependent on A. So if A gets refreshed, C will also get updated. Now, B has a report hanging off of it as well as C. I don't have any external files here, so this is not entirely the same scenario as I showed you in the demo. But if you have like an import that comes in B or the SQL Server in B, it will show up as an extra source under a link to B. So you would see that tree happening and flowing into B. Here's another one where I have another chain A, chain 2, which is hop A and B, and they are both starting points for C. So they both feed into C. So that means I started with connected to a Power BI data set and then did that again against another data set. So this is kind of a scenario where you combine 2 IT sources together and feed that into one data set. And then each of these items in the chain actually has its own report. So this is awesome. You can now see how data flows through your organization. You can also see impact analysis. So you can go into, I always lose where they do that. Thank you. You can see the impact analysis across workspaces, right? So you can even see that, that data set doesn't have to be in the same workspace. So it might be that somebody creates like, IT creates a sales database. That's somewhere in IT workspace. Then somebody else created a sales plus targets database for the world. And then somebody else created a version of that, which is sales targets Europe. Might be in a totally different workspace. You need to be able to see all of that and all of those hops and all of that interactivity and relationships in one view, and that's what this is for. So that's there as well. You can check it out. This will only work, of course, if you publish it to the service, because this lineage view doesn't exist in desktop. So that's that. I have a couple of things that's coming. This list is becoming
Ryan,
very
you raised your hand
short
again?
these days. Every day, yeah.
Ryan, you raised your hand again?
Yeah, yes, this is really good, Jay. So I got a bunch of questions that are coming up. So if in this chaining here, let's say we had a CSV in SharePoint or something, and that file directory got changed, I go refresh this composite model, let's say 3 or 4 chains down. Will the refresh fail because that essentially that file path changed, or will it kind of override it and just refresh the other data sources?
No, that depends really. Your refresh will fail because the import source is not available. That doesn't mean that the data set will now be broken, because it will still work, but it will only contain the old data.
Okay.
Right. So when you change the location for an import source, we won't be able to refresh it, but we'll keep the data that we already had. The story changes if your query, your live connected, right, your query source that you didn't import data to changes locations. If that happens, then refresh will fail. It's the same as with import, but also your data set won't work, because remember, when you do a direct query connection, there's no data in the data set, right? The only thing that happens when you start querying it is we'll actually send the query to the original data set. If we can't access that anymore, your reports will stop working. So if you build a chain, you better be very careful about who's dependent on you and what happens if I start changing something in that chain and what the impact is across my organization. Not only just renaming things, but also making structural changes to your data set, right? If I, for example, decide that I certainly don't need that table anymore in my top data set, well, maybe there's other people in that chain that use that one table, right? And then I suddenly break all their reports. That's where this lineage and impact analysis view becomes so important, because you need, before you start changing major parts of those data sets that are way up high in the chain, you need to be aware of that and potentially reach out to people like, hey, what are you using? And you can figure it out on your own, but probably just asking them is faster. Like, just to make sure. So suddenly, like, our end user analysis technology from Power BI enters this realm of IT, where you need to talk to people to figure out what the release version is, and what changes, what the delta is between the things, and synchronize things between users. So I hope that answers the question.
Great. Yeah, thank you.
Good stuff.
Okay.
Thanks.
Coming soon, support for embedded, so Power BI embedded, and API updates as well, just to make sure that developers can work with it.
Nice. Could you do me a favor, Jay, and the link that you had to Marco, Marco's video, if you could paste that into the chat. I'm not certain I paste the right one, so I want to make certain that we put the right one into the chat, because I think I need to review that as well. One of the challenges I see with this is the proper modeling, so that we could bring multiple models together with all dimensions getting all screwed up. So that video seems to be the key.
Yeah, I'll copy the link right now. And as I said, stay tuned for best practices document as well from us that will go into our documentation, just to, there's more than what the video from Marco just talks about that you need to think about.
Yeah, nice. Another question, are data flows one of the source types that can be included in a composite model?
Yes, because data flows can these days be accessed through direct query. So the answer is yes.
Nice. Excellent.
Yeah.
When did you do you expect general availability?
I cannot tell you any dates.
All right.
Because that's strictly under NDA. So I cannot
Sure.
tell you. But
Stay
I'll
tuned.
tell you that normally we try to go from a preview to general availability, depending on the size of the feature, between 6 months and a year after the preview.
All right.
So 6 months is already passed.
Math. I can do some math.
Right. So we might overshoot the 12 months a little bit, but it shouldn't be much, much, much longer than that, I would say. So that's as far as I'm willing to go.
Nice.
Thank you.
That's great. Awesome. Do we have any more final presentation-based questions for Jay? All right. I see your wrap-up slide.
Yeah, I have a wrap-up slide, but it's kind of outdated, I noticed. So I'm gonna remove this guy here because that's already there. The discovery stream setting is already live. So that was a slide deck from a couple weeks ago. Sorry about that. But yeah, basically, just to summarize, right? The preview allows you to connect to IT sources, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help you bridge the gap between IT and business, with business way and IT is done, as the example I gave in the beginning of this talk, right? And take it for a spin. Give us feedback. Try if it works in your organization. See if the shortcuts that we took while developing this are still valid for you, because we haven't built everything, right? So please take it for a spin. Provide feedback on the community website. Take a look at the blog to see what the limitations are. Explore the feature. That's the only way that we can actually build this into a great feature whenever we get to general availability. So I invite you to do that as well. My contact details are on the first slide. I'll also paste them in the chat. If you have issues, if you have problems, if you want to connect in any shape or form, or let me know your experience with this feature or anything else with Power BI, feel free to reach out.
Excellent. Thanks so much. That was awesome. You are a energetic and dynamic speaker. It's great to have you come to our Green Bay meetup user group. And I really hope that even if people weren't able to attend today, because lots of people are busy in summer, that we're going to get a lot of people interested in our recording of this. So I'm going to share my screen for moving into the kind of networking QA piece. We aren't able to get back in person quite yet, but we will be soon. So make certain, all of you out there, that you're using